Hello, my name is Samuel George London, and welcome to Comics for the Apocalypse. On today's episode, I speak to comic book artist, writer, and the incredibly imaginative Monty Nero about what comics he would take into the apocalypse. But before we get into it, I'd like to thank everyone that supported my most recent Kickstarter, Beyond Milford Green. At this point in time, we've reached the first stretch goal, and I'm hoping that we make it to the second stretch goal. Either way, I can't wait to finish the book and send it out to you all. Now, without further ado, on with the show. Hello, Monty Nero. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a sunny Monday morning, so I'm pleased. How's the weather?
In the air. Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, it's always quite sunny in Dundee. Sunny Dundee, is as it's known.
Oh yeah. That classic.
That classic. So it's nice weather up here. The old crocuses and daffodils are coming through.
Nice. So for anybody that doesn't know what you do in the world of comics, what do you do in the world of comics?
Good question. Well, I started off writing, I suppose, Death Sentence, and then that went on to do writing for Marvel and some stuff for 2000 AD and Vertigo. But latterly I've got more into drawing as well. I always did the covers for Death Sentence, but I've started drawing my own comics lately. So I'm doing this graphic novel called Hollow Monsters. And I'm also still writing Death Sentence Liberty, which is the new series, which is on Kickstarter right now.
Which is fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting it.
Now in its third issue. So that's with Martin Simmons, who's a brilliant artist who's doing a lot of covers for Marvel and working on a lot of good series in America for on Friendo. He's just done, and he's done some stuff for Vault Comics, I think, as well. So doing that, and then I'm also I'm working on I've written another comic which is coming out later this year with Yishan Lee, which is called Frenemies, and that'll be out in May.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Yishan.
Any tidbits on that? That's all.
It's about 7 rivals, are all sort of students at university, and they all get given this extraterrestrial knowledge,
right?
And they have to sort of compete to try and locate a missing planet that may or may not save our planet. It's sort of like very ambiguous as to whether it's actually going to be a great thing when we sort of find this hidden alien technology or a bad thing. So it's a pretty exciting series. Yeah,
that sounds fascinating. And when was that out? Sorry,
that's out in May.
May, brilliant. Yeah, I'll be looking out for that for sure. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on Comics for the Apocalypse. It's a real pleasure to have you on. And everybody, be sure to go check out Death Sentence Liberty on Kickstarter. Just search Death Sentence Liberty, and you'll find it. But I unfortunately have some bad news for you, Monty.
Oh no.
There's a bit of breaking news out of some sort of research facility. There's actually been a super intelligent ape uprising, and they're basically taking over the world. I'm just wondering, what's your plan of action for survival?
Well, I feel quite well prepared for this, because one of the first comics I ever bought myself was Monkey Business, which is Judge Dredd's story, Mike McMahon and John Wagner, or it might have been T.B. Grover, I can't remember. But yeah, fantastic story about an ape uprising in one of the city blocks. One of my favourite Judge Dredd stories. So yeah, I feel, having read that violence probably is not the answer. It tends to end badly.
Yeah.
So I think initially I would go to ground. I would just I would take shelter. But then I think once things had settled down, I imagine at that point the apes would be very much in control. Then I would emerge and because they're super intelligent, I would
Yeah.
appeal to their sense of reason and their better nature, and hopefully I'd be welcomed into their society.
I hope so.
I could do some interesting comics on the perspective of non-apes
Yeah, there you go.
in this new world order.
Oh, fantastic! So yeah, kind of, trying to appeal to their logic and reason.
Well, if they weren't super intelligent apes, I wouldn't bother. But as they are,
that's going to be the way forward. Definitely,
I think so.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's my philosophy generally.
And so, what happens is that you get employed by the super intelligent apes basically for writing and drawing
making
stories
comics,
and making comics. Just one evening when you're working with your ape colleagues, they ask you about kind of the good old days.
Oh yeah,
Not good old days for them, but in the old days,
the Dark Ages.
Yeah, there you go. Let's call it the Dark Ages. And they ask you, what's the first comic you remember enjoying?
Oh, that was Buster. Definitely, Buster was my favourite. I used to get that every week. Loved the characters. Buster himself, of course. Chalky. He's good on the draw. That was awesome because he used to draw lifelike pictures and completely fool everybody with them. He'd sort of run down an alley while being chased by people and then draw some picture of like some menacing dog or something, and they'd all think it was a real dog and run off. I just thought this was the most brilliant sort of skill, something I aspired to do, I think. And Disappearing Tricks, she was also awesome. I think I had a little crush on her even when I was about 5.
Sure.
She had an awesome superpower, the ability to be invisible, and she'd use that no doubt every week for good. It was a great strip. I used to love reading it and copying the pictures.
Oh, great! Yeah. So that was really kind of the genesis of you getting into comics.
Yeah, it had some good art. Yeah, it had some really good art. I had no idea at that age that Buster was related to Andy Capp in any way, but that was the initial kind of ethos of Buster. He was supposed to be his son. Yeah. And that's why he had the same cap, but that never occurred to me, even though I read Andy Capp as well. It never occurred to me until I was much older. Didn't realise that.
Oh, fascinating. And so that's kind of where all kind of making comics came for you. You kind of copying the drawings in Buster.
Yeah, it was something I did when I was little. But you do lots of things when you're little, don't you?
Sure.
I didn't really get into seriously sort of thinking about making my own comics till I was about 14 to 16, I would say.
Right.
Until then, it was all just like fun and just lots of things you'd do that were fun. And reading comics was always high on that list.
Fantastic. And what was it at the age of 14, 16 that kind of like spurred you on?
I guess at that age, you get into 2000 AD.
Yeah.
I think crucial to the whole thing was just drawing on or in my school books while I was, in lessons.
Yeah, meant to be learning.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I was learning. I always used to explain this to teachers at the time. Right. I was saying that I am listening.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's perfectly possible to listen and draw at the same time.
Yes.
And obviously some people would get annoyed, but I actually found it, quite an aid to concentration. I'd sort of doodle away.
Okay.
And I'd be listening, and they'd always try and catch me out and ask me a question, and I said, just answer it.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Wasn't really smart ass kid at the back drawing and answering the questions. So and also there's a few of us used to draw in or on our sketchbooks, and we used to sort of pass them about. And there was a kid a few seats down from me, and his drawings were a lot better than mine, and they were a lot cooler than mine. Mine was sort of like Buster type drawings.
Right.
And his were like Judge Dredd and sort of all this kind of gun-related imagery and, all this sort of dark sort of sci-fi stuff. And, his drawings were a lot more popular than my drawings in the class. So we sort of became friends. And then he sort of got me into 2000 AD, really. I started to realise that he was basically getting a lot of these drawings. He was basically copying them out of 2000 AD. So that's why I went and bought 2000 AD. It was because initially I just wanted to to get the artwork, and that's why I bought the Monkey Business. That was the first one I bought. It was one of the sci-fi specials it was in. They used to do a reprint, didn't they, of all the old 2000 AD stuff. So it wasn't a sci-fi special, it was a 2000 AD monthly or something like that. Okay. And it had all the McMahon artwork in, which was just mind-blowingly good, so that's why I picked that up.
Nice. And then that obviously kind of spurred you on to kind of aspire to making comics.
Yeah, when I was about 17 or 16, I started going up to the London Cartoon Centre in London, right. Where David Lloyd used to do a class on a Monday. And obviously I'd read V for Vendetta by that point, so right. That was, a big deal for me. And he basically just used to give us, there was like, it'd be about 10 people in the class or something, or 10 people turning up to each class. He'd give us like a script, and we'd have to draw it for the next week and bring it back. It'd be like a 2-page script. And then he'd basically rip it to shreds for us.
Yeah.
And it was a really good lesson, because very quickly it sort of taught me how shit I was at drawing comics, and that drawing sort of cool pictures, on the back of your sketchbook or on a bit of paper is nothing like the sort of skill set you need to draw comics, So you have to learn a lot more about anatomy and perspective and all this kind of stuff. So, it sort of used to go two ways for the students there. I mean, some of them just used to get really disheartened and think, well, this is really hard, and others just used to sort of really buckle down to it. So I just kept at it, and that was probably really helpful, because it did just teach me, how bad I was at it and how much I had to learn to get good at it. And you learn a lot just drawing your own comics about how comics work, what doesn't work, and things that you think will work don't work, and when you see it on the page it just doesn't work at all. So it's very educational to be doing that every sort of week for a year or so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's an amazing opportunity to have had when you were that young.
Always very grateful to David Lloyd for doing that. It's
because as long as you can swallow that pill, that bitter pill of look, this isn't any good, but you can get better if you want to. Is so kind of vital, particularly when you're young as well, because as you say, it can go two ways in that you can kind of either wallow in self-pity or kind of try and pull yourself up by bootstraps and try and kind of get better. That's a great thing. And was he kind of quite encouraging and saying, look, this isn't any good, but you can improve?
Yeah, it's not really Dave's style. Dave's quite a gruff guy.
Okay.
So I mean, it was always very obvious, to me, that he was coming up here on a Monday evening, spending like hours doing this. So that was a really nice thing to do. But when you chat to him, Dave's just he doesn't sort of he doesn't give you anything to sweeten the pill. It's just like this is this isn't working, and this is why it's not working, and lots of really useful information. But so it was quite tough sort of
tough
lesson, I guess, but very, very, very interesting. Obviously, having read his work, you listen to a guy like that.
Yeah, of course.
He knows what he's talking about. So fascinating to get that kind of input, from an early age. And it was really good storytelling wise as well, because they were sort of 2-3 page stories, sort of future shocky type stories.
Right.
So that was just a really good lesson on like how a story can work in a short amount of space and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's quite key. Is to try and work on short stories. Yeah. Everybody's kind of got like a trilogy type thing in their head, but that's really difficult. But kind
even Alan Moore. I mean, when Alan Moore started, he wanted to write these vast space operas.
Of course.
And in the end, he had to write these short sort of 2000 AD stories, and he said later, well, that was probably for the best.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think a lot of those ideas they initially had would probably have ended up in Halo Jones, because Halo Jones was going to be a 9-part kind of story, and we got 3 parts of it, 3 sort of books, but there were 9 books to that, and I imagine a lot of those sci-fi ideas that he had were going to end up in that. So I think it's a real shame that we never saw all 9 volumes of that. But some people have heard what the full story was, so that'd be an interesting thing to have experienced.
Definitely. So your ape colleagues are very fully engaged now, and they want to find out more. And so the next question that comes up is, what's the funniest or comic that made you laugh out loud the most?
Well, probably talking about it more, it's probably Dionne Quintus, which I used to absolutely love when I was a kid. Not just because it's funny, the way it's written is really funny, the lines are really funny, but also the cartooning in it, the artwork from Alan Davis is just absolutely brilliant. There's some hilarious caricatures in it, and all the aliens are incredibly, they're more real and kind of emotive and empathic than a lot of human characters, even though they're sort of weird alien shapes and stuff. And you can just see it's two people having an absolute blast making comics, and just genuinely funny, making you laugh. And it's one of my favourite things that Alan Moore's ever done, and I think it's one of the sadnesses of the way his career developed over the next sort of 40 years, is that he just sort of gave up on being funny, because he was really funny. His stuff was really funny, and it was really entertaining. And I think humour is a really important part of comics. I think it's when people try and worry about the legitimacy of their work and of the medium, they sort of tend to shy away from humour, because comics are always, traditionally sort of relegated to sort of the funny papers or whatever.
Yeah,
they don't get enough respect. But I think that's a mistake, because humour is one of the most powerful emotions you can elicit in someone, and it's a really fantastic sort of skill to be able to make people laugh and to share an idea all at the same time through the medium of comics. And it's just a brilliant strip. I think it's definitely, I'd put it right up there with sort of Watchmen and all his more sort of lauded kind of classic material as one of the best things he ever did. So definitely Dionne Quintus, and also Asterix. Asterix used to make me laugh a lot when I was little. Used to read it. My dad used to read it as well. Sort of all the sort of gags and caricatures in sort of Asterix in Britain or something. Just really, really funny. Or Asterix in Corsica. The sort of humour in there, the timing of the humour as well, and again the skill of the storytelling and the artwork. Even now, when I'm doing a sort of joke or something in a comic, I realise after I've written the scene that the timing of that is just pure Asterix. It's just a really fantastically made strip.
Straight up. Fantastic. And so switching emotions a little bit, they go on to ask, what's the saddest or most upsetting comic that you've read?
Yeah, that is a tough one. Probably it was a book, graphic novel put out by Comex in about 2010, I think, something like that, called Seeds. Not to be confused with the current series by the Burger Books have put out, but which is The Seeds. This is just Seeds, and it's by Ross McIntosh, and it's basically a short graphic novel about his experience when his dad was dying of cancer. Wow. And it's really well done, really well. He sort of drew and wrote and lettered the whole thing, and it's he said it was very much sort of like his way of dealing with what was happening. But it's incredibly well observed, really well told, very moving, obviously very sad. And it's just a really, really excellent bit of work, and it's a shame he hasn't sort of done anything sort of similar since, because it was a really excellent bit of comic book work, and a lot of people were very moved by it. So it's well worth checking out. You can if you go to Comex or Google that, you could probably still get copies of that.
No doubt. And was there any particular kind of moment, without kind of spoiling the story too much, is there any particular moment that kind of comes to mind that, wow, that's actually kind of either insightfully upsetting?
Well, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but yeah, it's a graphic novel about his dad dying of cancer, so it's very real. And sort of, the ending of that, I think a lot of people sort of tear up at the ending of that book.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of still sticking with being upset, but kind of the flip side to that. The apes ask you, what's the scariest or most horrifying comic that you've read?
Probably anything by James McCulloch.
Yeah, he's come up a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, his stuff is really, really brutal horror, and he's got a Kickstarter now, I think, on a new sort of short story sort of anthology of horror books, which might be a good place for people that want to get some serious horror into their lives to start. So he did City of Lost Souls with Janine Van Moosel, who's based in Dundee, which is where I live. And they're both really good comics people, and it's really, really good horror stuff. It is very, very dark, very, very dark. So don't go there if you're not open to that kind of material.
Sure. And what is it about this comic in particular that kind of jumps out at you being horrifying?
Well, it's kind of everything. It's got a really sort of dark heart. I mean, James is a really sound guy. He's a really great guy. He's a really talented, creative guy. His darker side comes out in these kind of comics that he writes. But also the way Janine draws it is so scratchy, and sort of there's a lot of heavy black, but it's kind of like a very scratchy, gnarly style that kind of it's really effective as far as like telling the story and making you sort of feel like itchy. Do you know what I mean? It's got
you feel like the tension in the air.
Yeah, you got the texture. The texture of the horror is there on the page, which I think often is lacking from a lot of horror material. It's kind of like they're too polished and clean, So I think that's one of the strengths. If you're trying to do horror in a comic, I think that's an important part of what works. That visceral feeling you get from the artwork. So it's very effective.
Fantastic. And so kind of trying to shift to a more positive light, they ask, what's the most meaningful comic to you?
Well, bit of a weird one, because I guess your connection to a comic is like a very personal thing, isn't it? So my most, like, if I was just going to take one comic with me, to a desert island or something, it's probably be issue 14 of Hellblazer by Jamie Delano and Richard Piers Rayner. So again, it's sort of like that formative age where I was getting into comics, and I might have even bought it while I was, on my way to the Cartoon Centre in London. Went into Forbidden Planet, bought, a couple of comics that I was into. I think I'd read Hellblazer from issue 1. So, I mean, it was just a fantastic, fantastic comic. It had amazing covers from Dave McKean, brilliant, brilliant stories, awesome art, initially from John Ridgway, and then later on Richard Piers Rayner. And it was kind of like, it was very, especially Richard Piers Rayner, his style is kind of quite photorealistic. So it's a very kind of real, kind of the kind of characters, the characterizations, the situations, kind of sort of magical realism, isn't it? But before that became a thing, certainly in the mainstream. And I just remember taking this comic and sort of sitting in the middle of some heinously busy sort of restaurant in the centre of sort of the West End of London, and just totally losing myself into it, and totally getting lost in it for sort of 15 minutes, and just feeling, a real sense of sort of peace and tranquility as I was reading this story, and getting lost in the characters. And it's one of the quieter issues of Hellblazer. I mean, Hellblazer, there's often a lot of, horror material in there and sort of strange magical events. But in that particular issue, it's kind of like the setup to a much longer story, and he kind of like just ends up kind of in a sort of hippie traveler camp, and they kind of like take him in and kind of make him question, all kinds of things that he's been doing, and kind of the sort of cocky, sort of glib parts of his character, and he starts to relax in a way that he hasn't in a long time. And the comic itself's got quite a powerful sense of sort of time and place, and this sort of sense of peace. So and that obviously really came across to me while I was reading it, and it just had a very sort of powerful effect on me. And I think that connection that a comic has with the reader, where you really sort of move them in some ways, something that means a lot to me, and it's something I'm always trying to achieve in my comics, with Death Sentence, Liberty, and so on. I'm always trying to find moments where you can sort of connect with people in that way.
That's amazing. And you think that has kind of, that particular issue had quite an effect on you as a storyteller?
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
Yeah,
your writing.
Yeah, I mean,
well
Jamie Delano as one of the first writers that I was really sort of a fan of. More so than Alan Moore initially, because I you come to comics at that moment, and I didn't know that Alan Moore kind of invented the character of Constantine. I was just like, oh, Hellblazer, that looks cool, great covers, get into it, and you think, oh, this is really great stuff. So you sort of learn about the history of comics and the characters later, I think, but I just took it as I found it, which was just a really fantastic bit of storytelling.
Brilliant. And then they asked for something off the beaten track. What's the most underrated comic you've read?
Well, I was thinking about this. There's all kinds of different ways you can be underrated. So I think probably, even though Tamara Drew by Posey Simmons has been made into a movie and it's very popular in certain circles,
right.
It's not a comic that translates well. It doesn't really sell that well in America, and it's kind of like, she's got quite a reputation as being quite a middle class kind of, concerned with middle class kind of characters and themes and stuff.
Right.
But I think the way that she tells stories, she uses a lot of prose. She uses like blocks of prose as well, interspersed with little sort of comic strips and single images and stuff. And I think it's a lot more important as far as the sort of development of the medium of comics, or the way that storytelling works in comics. I think it's a lot more important than a lot of people realize. And I think that over time, when people look back in 100 years of sort of the comics at this time, I think these will be, really, really up there as some of the most important kind of stories of the time. And for me as well, because I don't know anything about sort of the middle class kind of literary world in which she sort of moves in, but it totally brings it alive to me. Really gives me an insight into this world and these characters, and she's brilliant with dialogue and little kind of characterizations in her renderings of the characters, and her storytelling is really fantastic. So I'm particularly interested in the way she uses the prose as well to sort of like add extra layers to it, and a lot of people find that kind of problematic because they say, oh, this isn't comics, you know what I mean? But it is. I mean, comics has always been the marrying of words and pictures, since the very first comics. And, it's just the fact that there's a lot of prose in these, a lot of heavy, bits of it are like a book, there's like paragraph after paragraph of prose. But, the more I read that stuff, the more I like it, and the more I feel it's important. and interesting as far as the juxtaposition between the different elements of the meaning in the text and the image in the text, which is what everyone always goes on about with comics. The Scott McCloud, gap between the panels, the gutters, and how a lot of the storytelling is done in that. Well, here you've got a lot of storytelling done between sort of blocks of prose and between prose and image and stuff. It's just a different way of achieving the same kind of thing, and there's no doubt that it does add a lot of texture and depth to the stories and the characters, which is quite interesting. But then also City of Glass, which it's by Mazzucchelli. He's a well-known creator, but it's one of his kind of lesser known works. It's Paul Karasik and David Mazzucchelli. So he was more kind of illustrating rather than not illustrating. He was doing the artwork, the visual storytelling, rather than coming up with the story himself. It's not an adaptation of the book, and it's just a really, really the art's quite simplified within it. It's kind of like a step towards this sort of asterisk polyp stuff that came later, and it's just got some really, really brilliant moments in it, a sort of sequential storytelling, and it's kind of really deep. It's kind of like a really deep sort of story about sort of pluralities of meaning and instability of concepts of kind of your personality and cities, and there's all kinds of like visual metaphors in it and so on and so forth. And it's one of those comics that the more you read it, the more you find in it. It didn't sell particularly well at the time, but it's definitely worth checking out, particularly if you're a fan of, obviously everyone knows Mazzucchelli from the Batman, Daredevil, and the Asterisk Polyp stuff. But it's definitely worth checking this out. It's one of his more interesting works, I think.
Great. And for anyone that doesn't know, what's the setting of City of Glass?
Oh right, yeah. Well, it's a really interesting story because basically it's about a detective. He's a writer, and he gets mistaken for a detective called Paul Auster.
Right.
And that leads into a noirish kind of. There's lots of detective noir fun with like detective noir kind of archetypes and stereotypes. But as he sort of falls into this kind of detective story that he's trying to solve, it just sort of descends into a sort of noirish journey of madness and identity and language and human nature. But within this kind of metafictional detective story, it's really interesting kind of book and graphic novel. But the graphic novel adds a lot of sort of layers to it, I think.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so we come on to one of the most difficult questions. And for you, what's the best comic of all time?
Well, yeah, that'd probably have to be Watchmen. I mean,
Great.
as far as if you're looking for a comic that you can just constantly find all kinds of interesting kind of things about how comics work and how to tell stories in multiple different ways, and even though it's like massively popular and lauded, I still think people underestimate just how much Dave Gibbons is responsible for the genius of it. Because Alan Moore wrote a lot of great stuff, but he didn't do anything like Watchmen again. And that's because he didn't work with Dave Gibbons again. And a lot of what's possible and what's done with the storytelling in Watchmen is only possible because Dave drew it, and because Dave had the storytelling chops and the skills and the energy and the knowledge to sort of make it work. Indeed, a lot of the stuff that works in Watchmen, another artist, if they tried it, it wouldn't work at all, because it's all down to the discipline and the sort of skill of Dave as a storyteller. Particularly, I think people often overlook the fact that he lettered it, which is really important, because it's that sweet juxtaposition between what the letters are telling you and then what the imagery is telling you. And then obviously, because you've got the 9-panel grid, you've got a lot of opportunities to sort of switch between different moments in time, panel to panel, and to have visual metaphors, and there's lots of different storytelling techniques. I mean, the story is one thing. The story itself, about the science fiction monster that they create to try and scare the world into sort of world peace. The story itself is kind of like, B level. It's more, as Alan himself always said, it's more like how the story is told that's interesting about this.
Yeah.
And I think it's a shame that they didn't do more stuff together, and I think it's a shame that a lot of those techniques that kind of clearly work in Watchmen weren't then applied to sort of something that was maybe not a genre story, something more real life, which is why I'm always really angry with Sienkiewicz, because obviously Big Numbers was, I think that would have been Alan Moore's masterpiece, and
Right.
Bill Sienkiewicz only drew 3 issues, and only 2 of those came out, and then he sort of just stopped, and I'm just like, oh, you know what I mean?
Such a shame.
It's such a shame. It's such a brilliant. I mean, I absolutely love the first 2 issues of Big Numbers anyway, but I'm just so gutted that we never saw the whole thing. And because obviously it's not a science fiction story. It's pretty much a real world story, and there's a lot of really interesting sort of storytelling in that. Not perhaps to the level of Dave, but Sienkiewicz is probably a better. You say paint me a picture. Sienkiewicz will do you a nicer picture. But as far as like a comic storyteller, I think Dave is in a class of his own, really. And he said himself it was just the that moment in time, where he had the enthusiasm, he had the knowledge, he had the energy, he had the inspiration to create that. I mean, it was 2 years of his life, went into making that incredible body of sequential storytelling. So I think we all owe a debt to Dave Gibbons for doing that. Oh, and it's hilarious as well, because I found out later. I mean, I know him a little bit now because he comes up to Dundee quite a lot, and his dad used to live in Dundee as well. Right. His granddad, I think, used to work in the customs here in Dundee. So he had these memories of like a house, a sort of bungalow in Dundee. And when he came up to the university one time, I managed to find it for him, and I said, "Look, this is the house. This is the one that you're talking about." And so he had a very happy time, sort of going around there and reminiscing and sending photos of it to his family and stuff. So that was really nice. And he's just a totally top guy, Dave. Really like Dave.
Brilliant, excellent. And I'm just curious. Have you read any of the Doomsday Clock?
No. No,
you haven't.
No. Sort of took my lead from Dave on that one. He was just like,
nah.
So I'm like, fair enough.
Just keep it, stick with the original.
Yeah.
That was the story, and that's it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
That is fantastic.
I don't get upset about people making money about doing similar things, but at the same time, I don't have to read it, do I? So
no, exactly.
I read a lot of comics every month that come out that are brilliant and are new and original, in the same way that Watchmen was at the time. So that's the way forward.
Brilliant. And so your ape colleagues kind of are really getting down to the nitty gritty now, and they wonder from that list if there was one comic that you could just keep with you, which would it be?
What, of that list?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? It'd probably be Dionne Quintus. Yeah, that would probably just, because ultimately what we're talking about here is entertainment. And I just find it endlessly entertaining, endlessly amusing. I'd enjoy, I could copy the pictures and learn loads about how to be a better artist just by sort of looking at what Alan Davis does. And I just really, really enjoy that comic. So, yeah, it'd probably be that. Yeah, just the most fun one.
Yeah, exactly.
Lifting and And as well, it's just technically super skilled. You know, the writing's really good, and the art is incredible. So yeah, it'd probably be that one. I think one of the reasons why Alan didn't do any more was because there was this whole kind of thing about, oh, it's actually just kind of OC and Stiggs from National Lampoon, which
Okay.
is kind of like a very similar tone of sort of characters
Right.
and sort of type of humour. And he sort of felt like, well, initially it was just a future shock, and then he got asked to expand it, and he sort of like, well, this has got out of control, really. So I think because he was very much at that stage worried about being taken seriously and
Right.
the medium being taken seriously and doing sort of serious works. I think he was like, oh, I can't continue with this kind of thing that I basically just sort of, at the very least, is very heavily inspired by OC and Stiggs from National Lampoon. So he just didn't want anything more to do with it, sort of thing, which is a shame because it was really funny. And I don't care, you know, that it's similar to OC and Stiggs. It's just, you know, it's very much his own thing.
I mean,
and it's okay. It's okay to be inspired by people, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I mean, I don't know. It's that type of kind of comparison and saying it's just really, really similar. I mean, you know, how many buddy cop films are there? But there are many good buddy cop films, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay to kind of reinvent the same thing almost, and as long as it kind of has its own voice, I think.
Yeah.
Then that's okay. I think, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, whenever I do anything, I mean, with Death Sentence, it's a superpowers story. But the whole kind of ethos and approach to it is like, well, every sort of element of that, of getting superpowers and having superpowers, you just think, well, how can I do this in a new way? How can this be fresh? How can I sort of turn this on its head? And you can almost use the expectations that people have got from other things to make your comic seem really exciting and new and so forth, because you just sort of flip it all around and you do the opposite of what everyone's kind of used to. So that works really well in Death Sentence. I mean, it's very much a story where it's not super heroic in any way. There's no sort of superheroes and supervillains, but people get superpowers.
Yeah.
But it's much more like, well, what would you and I actually do with superpowers? Probably the last thing I'd want to do is go around heroing. But we'd probably be. I mean, I'd like to make some really amazing comics, you know. So I'd probably do that like in a really sort of superpowered way. Sort of. Hopefully they'd be better than the ones I'm making at the moment. You know, I think if you sort of look about, well, how would ordinary people, you got in Death Sentence, you've got Verity, who's an artist, a very frustrated artist. You've got Weasel, who's a rock star, and you've got Roots, who's basically dealing drugs in Brixton, and they're all living very sort of kind of real, kind of multi-layered sort of lives. And it's like, okay, well, if you suddenly got these abilities to be like the best you could possibly be, what would you do with that if you had only 6 months left to live? And it kind of sets up this very dramatic, kind of quite moving situation where you've only got 6 months to sort of fulfill, you know, your dreams or to sort of help people around you. And how would you actually go about doing that? It's very sort of action packed as well. There's lots of action in it, but I don't like guns. I'm not really a big fan of guns. So if there are people with guns in Death Sentence, but they tend to be the idiots that are just sort of like pumping bullets for to no effect. And one of the great things about superpowers, I think, is you can have this sort of kinetic action. With these sort of like, you know, very pyrotechnic sort of effects, but it's kind of like very much in the realm of fantasy. It's not sort of like, you know, gun based. So I'm very, very much a fan of that sort of thing. Sort of like, it is very gritty and action packed and real. There's lots of swearing and sex and drugs and rock and roll and stuff, but it's all very entertaining.
Fantastic. And so we're in your apocalypse situation, which has turned out okay. You know, you're employed by super intelligent apes. But I'm wondering what weapon, tool, or useful item you'd like to take in with you.
It would have to be one of those sort of skull shaver sort of razors, and sort of an electric razor. With this razor, I would I would dramatically sort of shave the hair off the apes, and
Brilliant.
just thus prove that we're all the same underneath, man.
Nice.
And this would no doubt bring about a new era of peace between the hairless and the hairy, and I'd hopefully be lauded as some sort of Nelson Mandela figure.
Definitely. I mean, it sounds like it. That is I did not expect that answer. That is amazing. It's a very good point. So that is absolutely fantastic. Well, Monty Nero, thank you so much for being on Comics for the Apocalypse. It's been a real pleasure. And for the listeners, where can they find out all about you?
Oh, right. Well, Death Sentence to Liberty is on Kickstarter now. So there's 3 issues of that you can get, along with lots of nice sort of extra things like original art or prints or badges or magnets and so on, and bottle openers, things like that. So that's a good place to start. Then I'm on Twitter as Monty Nero, MontyNero. And also there's a Facebook Monty Nero page, and also there's a Death Sentence page where you can sort of read all about the what's going on with that. Yeah, that's probably the best place. Got a website as well, but you know how it is with websites, don't tend to update that as much as the old Twitter and the old blog, the old Instagram and stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. So Twitter, Instagram are kind of the best places to find you in terms of kind of, you know, daily updates and things.
Yeah, there's only one Monty Nero, so it's an easy thing to Google.
Bingo. That's the best, being unique. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Monty, for being on today. It's been a real pleasure. And do you, apart from Frenemies, do you have any other projects coming up at all?
Well, the main one I'm working on at the moment is Hollow Monsters. I've really got to get the next issue of that finished. It's sort of overdue, so I need to get that done as quickly as possible. So I'm going to be beavering away of that very heavily over the next 6 weeks, and trying to get that next instalment of that out to people. Yeah, that's very much my focus at the moment.
Fantastic. And when's that due to be out?
Well, I'll be sending that out to the backers in about 2 months, I think.
Right.
That you can get the first issue. It's on sale in Orbital Comics and also Page 45. And after that, then it'll be ready to sort of once I've done the next installment, it'll be ready to sort of go together into the sort of graphic novel format. So it's basically making chapters of a graphic novel, but it's very much conceived as a graphic novel that's sort of coming out in sort of in chapters, as it were.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time today, and hopefully I'll see you at a con soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. It's been really good fun. Thanks for inviting me on.
Quite all right. Thanks again, Monty.
Cheers, dude.
Bye. Thanks again to Monty for being on Comics for the Apocalypse. It was a heck of a lot of fun. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review for us on iTunes or whichever podcast service you use, as not only will it let me know that you liked it, but I believe it helps make other people aware of the show as well. If you'd like to check out Monty's work or follow him on social media, those links are in the show notes, along with all of our own links to the various areas of the internet. And finally, as long as the apocalypse doesn't come to pass in the next week, I'll see you next Monday. Bye for now.